What if the one man who could destroy your entire world was the only one who could actually save it? Olivia Hayes never asked for a fairy tale. At 34, she was just trying to keep the lights on and the smile on her 8-year-old daughter Sophie's face. Every morning started the same way in their tiny 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of Portland. Olivia, already in her diner uniform, pouring cereal, while Sophie sat at the rickety kitchen table, legs swinging, sketching another picture of us in our forever house. "Mommy, when I grow up, I'm gonna buy you a real castle," Sophie said that morning, holding up her latest drawing, 2 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow roof. "No more leaky ceiling." Olivia laughed softly, the kind of laugh that hid the knot in her throat. "As long as we have each other, kiddo, any roof is a castle." She kissed the top of Sophie's head, breathing in the smell of strawberry shampoo and innocence. Those quiet moments were everything, the only thing that made the double shifts, the unpaid bills, and the constant fear worth it. But today the fear had a name. She found the official letter slipped under the door when she got home from the night shift. Sterling Properties was redeveloping the whole block into luxury condos. 30 days to vacate. No extensions, no mercy. Olivia sat on the edge of her bed after Sophie fell asleep, the letter shaking in her hands. Tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them. How was she supposed to tell her little girl they were losing the only home they'd ever known? How many more times could she promise, "We'll figure it out," before Sophie stopped believing her? The next afternoon, Olivia made the decision. She couldn't just wait to be thrown out. She would go straight to the top, Nicholas Sterling's corporate headquarters downtown, and beg for more time. Just a few extra weeks to find somewhere else. Anything. She picked Sophie up from school early, explaining it was an important adventure. Sophie, in her favorite purple sneakers and clutching her sketchbook like a shield, didn't complain. That was Sophie, always trying to make things easier for her mom. The Sterling Tower rose like a glass monolith against the gray Portland sky. Inside, the lobby felt colder than the rain outside. Marble floors, sleek furniture, people in expensive suits who never had to choose between groceries and rent. Olivia's heart hammered as she approached the reception desk, Sophie's small hand tight in hers. "Hi, I need to speak with Mr. Sterling. It's about the building on Maple Street. We're one of the families being evicted." Her voice cracked just a little. The receptionist barely looked up. "Mr. Sterling doesn't take walk-ins. You can submit a request online." Olivia felt the last of her hope slipping away. She turned, ready to leave with her tail between her legs, when Sophie tugged her hand. "Mommy, look." A tall man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit had just stepped out of the private elevator. 6'2", sharp jaw, eyes the color of winter steel. Nicholas Sterling himself. He was already checking his watch, clearly on his way somewhere more important than the lives he was upending. Olivia stepped forward before she could lose her nerve. "Mr. Sterling?" "Please, just 1 minute." He stopped, gaze flicking over her tired uniform, the little girl at her side. His expression didn't soften. "Ma'am, my office handles tenant matters. This isn't the time or place." Sophie, who had been quietly drawing in her sketchbook the whole time, suddenly stepped forward and held up a page. It was their apartment, crooked windows, leaky ceiling and all, but drawn with bright crayons and a giant heart around the 2 stick figures. At the bottom, she'd written in careful letters, "Please don't take our castle away. My mommy works really hard." Nicholas stared at the drawing. For the briefest second, something flickered behind those cold eyes, something almost like recognition. Then he handed it back, voice flat. "I'm sorry." Business is business. He turned to leave. But Olivia's voice cut through the lobby like a blade. "Business? This is our home. This is my daughter's whole world. You can't just erase us." Nicholas paused, back still to them. The lobby had gone quiet. Sophie looked up at her mom with wide, trusting eyes, the same eyes that had believed every promise Olivia had ever made. And in that heartbeat, the powerful CEO who had built an empire by never looking back felt the first tiny crack in the armor he'd worn for years. He didn't turn around. Not yet. But he also didn't walk away. Nicholas Sterling turned slowly, his steel-gray eyes locking onto Olivia first, then dropping to the little girl still clutching her sketchbook like it was armor. For the first time that day, the Ruthless CEO looked unsettled. 10 minutes, he said, voice low and clipped. My office. After that, I have a board meeting I can't miss. The private elevator ride to the top floor was quiet, except for Sophie's soft humming of a song from her favorite cartoon. Olivia kept her daughter's hand tight in hers, heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. When the doors opened onto a corner office that felt more like a penthouse than a workspace, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Portland skyline, sleek furniture that probably cost more than her car, Olivia felt the full weight of how far out of her league this was. But she sat down anyway. She told him everything, the words spilling out before she could stop them. How she'd gotten pregnant at 26 by a man who disappeared the day Sophie was born. How she'd worked 2 jobs ever since just to keep a roof over their heads. The asthma attacks last winter that racked up medical bills she was still paying off in installments. The way their little apartment on Maple Street leaked when it rained, but still felt like home because it was the only place Sophie had ever known. Nicholas listened without interrupting, elbows on his desk, fingers steepled. His face stayed unreadable, but every few seconds his gaze would drift to Sophie, who had curled up on the massive leather couch and was quietly drawing again. This time, a picture of their building with a brand new shiny roof and a tall figure standing protectively outside it. When Olivia finally ran out of words, her voice cracked. I'm not here begging for charity, Mr. Sterling. I'm just asking for time. 30 more days. Enough for me to find us somewhere safe before you tear our world down. The silence stretched between them. Nicholas stared out at the city for a long moment. Then he exhaled, almost like the decision pained him. 60 days, he said. I'll have my legal team draft the extension this afternoon. My assistant will also send over a list of relocation options with first-month rent covered. That's the best I can do. Olivia's shoulders sagged with relief so sharp it felt like she might cry right there in front of him. Thank you. I don't even know what to say. As they stood to leave, Sophie paused at the door and looked back at Nicholas with that bright, trusting smile that always melted Olivia's heart. You're not as scary as you look, Mr. Sterling. Maybe you could come visit our castle before we have to move. I'll draw you right in the middle of the picture. Nicholas didn't answer. He just gave a single nod, but something in his eyes had changed. That night, after Olivia tucked Sophie into bed with stories and extra hugs, she sat alone in their tiny kitchen, rereading the courier-delivered extension letter that had already arrived. 60 days. It felt like a miracle. For the first time in months, she let herself breathe a little easier, watching Sophie sleep peacefully under the glow of her nightlight. See, baby, she whispered to the quiet room. We're going to be okay. But as the hours ticked by, doubt started creeping in like the cold draft through the window. Men like Nicholas Sterling didn't bend rules for strangers, not without a reason. What was his angle? Why did he look almost haunted when Sophie talked about their castle? The next morning, Olivia was rushing Sophie out the door for school when a sleek black car pulled up right in front of their aging apartment building. Nicholas Sterling stepped out, still in one of those perfectly tailored coats, looking completely out of place against the cracked sidewalks and faded brick. He stood on the curb, staring up at the building he was supposed to demolish, the one full of families just like theirs, and for the briefest moment, his usual mask slipped. He looked almost conflicted. Olivia froze in the doorway, Sophie's hand still in hers. Their eyes met across the distance, and in that second, both of them wondered the same silent question. What happens when the man who holds all the power starts caring about the people he's supposed to forget? What happens when the man who holds all the power starts caring about the people he's supposed to forget? Nicholas Sterling stood on that cracked sidewalk like he'd stepped out of a different life, his expensive coat catching the afternoon light, while Olivia's heart raced with a mix of gratitude and pure suspicion. I was passing by. Thought I'd see the building for myself before the crews arrive. But Olivia knew better. No one like him just passed by neighborhoods scheduled for demolition. Sophie, however, lit up like Christmas morning. Mr. Sterling! You came to our castle! She ran forward and grabbed his hand without a second thought, tugging him toward the front steps. Come see my room. I drew you a new picture last night, with you standing right next to us. Olivia wanted to pull her daughter back, to keep that bright, trusting heart safe. But the look on Nicholas's face stopped her. For once, the steel in his eyes had softened into something raw, almost lost. Inside the tiny apartment, he looked comically out of place, towering over their second-hand furniture, ducking under the low-hanging light fixture. Sophie proudly showed him every crayon drawing taped to the fridge, every corner that made their little home theirs. When she pointed out the leaky spot on the ceiling, Nicholas reached up without thinking and pressed his palm against the damp plaster like he could hold the whole building together by sheer will. Later, after Sophie had fallen asleep mid-story on the couch, Olivia made coffee in mismatched mugs and finally asked the question burning inside her. "Why are you really here, Mr. Sterling?" 60 days, the relocation list, now this. You don't strike me as the type who loses sleep over people like us. He stared into his cup for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. I grew up in a place a lot like this. One bedroom, single mom working double shifts at a diner just like yours. She used to tell me the same thing you tell Sophie, as long as we have each other. Then one winter she got sick. No insurance, no time off. By the time I was 14, she was gone, and I swore I'd never be powerless again. Built everything so nothing like that could touch me, or anyone I cared about. His eyes met hers across the small table. Your daughter's drawing reminded me of the last picture my mom ever drew with me. I haven't thought about that in 20 years. Olivia felt something crack inside her own walls. For the first time, she saw the man behind the empire, not the villain, but someone carrying ghosts heavier than her own. She reached out, almost touched his hand, then pulled back. Trust like this had burned her before. The next few days blurred into something neither of them expected. Nicholas started showing up after work, quietly fixing the leaky faucet, bringing groceries that weren't on her budget, even helping Sophie with a school project on dream homes. Sophie bloomed around him, laughing louder, sleeping better, drawing pictures where the three of them stood together under that rainbow roof. But Olivia's deepest fears never slept. One rainy Thursday, Sophie came home from school pale and wheezing, her asthma flaring worse than it had in months. The stress of the move, the uncertainty, it was all catching up. Olivia rushed her to the emergency room, heart shattering as her little girl struggled for every breath. Nicholas found them there. He didn't ask permission. He simply sat beside Olivia in the sterile waiting room, his suit jacket draped over her shoulders against the chill, his hand steady on her back while doctors ran tests. "She's going to be okay," he said, voice low and certain. "I've already called the best pediatric pulmonologist in the city. Whatever she needs, it's covered." Olivia turned to him, tears she couldn't hold back anymore streaming down her face. "Why? Why do any of this for us? I keep waiting for the catch, Nicholas. I keep waiting for the day you remember we're just another line item on your redevelopment plan." He looked at her then, really looked, and the last of his armor fell away. "Because watching you fight for her every single day, it's the bravest thing I've ever seen. And because for the first time in my life, I don't want to tear anything down. I want to build something that lasts." In that moment, with Sophie sleeping peacefully in the next room and the rain tapping against the hospital window, Olivia almost let herself believe him. Almost. But as they left the hospital later that night, Sophie tucked safely in Nicholas's arms, breathing easier with new medication. The phone in his pocket buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his face tightened. A text from his board. "Final demolition permits approved. No more delays. Investors want this project moving next week." He slipped the phone away before Olivia could see, but the shadow had returned to his eyes. And as they drove home through the glittering Portland streets, Olivia felt the old fear coil tight in her chest once more. What if the man who was finally learning how to care was about to be forced to choose between his empire and the only family that had ever made him feel human again? What if the man who was finally learning how to care was about to be forced to choose between his empire and the only family that had ever made him feel human again? The drive home from the hospital was quiet, the city lights blurring past the windows. Sophie slept soundly in the back seat, her breathing even thanks to the new medication. Olivia sat in the passenger seat, stealing glances at Nicholas. His jaw was tight, hands gripping the steering wheel a little too hard. When they pulled up in front of the apartment building, he killed the engine but didn't move to get out. "I have to tell you something," he said, voice rough. "The board. They approved the demolition permits. They want crews here next week. No more delays." Olivia felt the floor drop out from under her. She stared at him, betrayal and hurt flashing across her face. "So all of this, the hospital, the groceries, fixing the faucet, it was just to make us feel better while you still destroyed everything?" "No." Nicholas turned to her fully, his eyes desperate in a way she'd never seen. "It started that way, but it's not anymore. None of it is. Olivia, these past weeks with you and Sophie, I've remembered what it feels like to care about something more than profit margins and quarterly reports. I've remembered what my mother fought for every single day." He reached for her hand, and this time she let him take it. "I called an emergency board meeting tonight. I'm pulling out of the luxury condo project on Maple Street. I'm converting the entire development into mixed-income housing, keeping your building, renovating every unit, making sure families like yours have a real chance to stay. It's going to cost the company millions. The investors are furious. They might even try to force me out as CEO." Olivia's breath caught. Tears welled up in her eyes. "Nicholas, you would do that? For us?" "For you," he said. "For Sophie. And for the boy I used to be who watched his mom break her back just to keep a roof over our heads. I don't want to be the man who tears families apart anymore. I want to be the man who builds them up." The next morning, everything changed. Nicholas stood in the lobby of his own company and announced the new direction to stunned employees and angry investors. Cameras rolled as he spoke about second chances, about the little girl's drawing that reminded him of his own childhood, about a single mother who showed him what real strength looked like. Meanwhile, Olivia sat with Sophie at their kitchen table, helping her color yet another picture. This one of the three of them in front of their building with a bright new sign that read, "Home." "Mommy," Sophie said, looking up with those big, trusting eyes, "is Mr. Nicholas going to stay with us now? Like, forever?" Olivia smiled through her tears. "I think he might, sweetheart. I really think he might." That evening, as the sun set over Portland, Nicholas showed up at their door carrying takeout and a brand new sketchbook for Sophie. But more importantly, he carried the official documents showing the development plans had been completely rewritten. As they ate together at the small table, talking, Sophie proudly showing him her latest drawing of their forever family, Olivia looked across at the man who had once seemed untouchable. Later, after Sophie was tucked in bed, the two of them stood on the tiny balcony overlooking the city. "I'm scared," Olivia admitted. "I've been hurt before. Sophie has already lost so much." Nicholas pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "I know. And I can't promise it'll be easy, but I can promise this. I'm not going anywhere. Not ever. You and Sophie, you're my home now, the one I never knew I was looking for." Sophie, who had snuck out of bed and was peeking from the doorway, "I knew it. Our castle finally has a king." In the weeks that followed, the building on Maple Street came back to life. Walls were repaired, roofs fixed, new playgrounds built for the kids who lived there. Nicholas stepped down as the sole face of Sterling Properties, choosing instead to lead a foundation focused on affordable housing in honor of his mother, and now, in honor of the family he had found. On a bright Saturday afternoon, as Sophie ran around the freshly painted courtyard chasing bubbles, Olivia and Nicholas watched her with matching smiles. He slipped an arm around her waist and pulled her close. "Mommy, look!" Sophie called out, holding up a new drawing. It showed three people holding hands under a rainbow roof, but this time, the tall figure in the middle had his arm around the mommy figure. At the bottom, in Sophie's careful handwriting, it read, "Our family." Olivia leaned her head against Nicholas's shoulder, finally letting go of the last of her fears. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving, she was living. They all were. And somewhere above them, in a place where single moms never have to choose between hope and a roof, two hearts that had been broken by life finally found their way home, in each other.